Welcome to episode 31 of Contrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kelleran. Today we have a very special guest to talk to us about a whole bunch of different topics, but I've been reading his work for a while on academia, DEI, what's going on with mainstream media, what's going on in the world, and he has a lot of interesting stuff to say on a lot of topics I've been following pretty closely for a while. So, Yuri, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Comrade Ben.
Yeah, I appreciate taking the time. I want to ask kind of the obvious question. How did you choose the pseudonym Yuri Bezmenov? And if you could also give us a little bit of background while you're at it, I think that'd be an interesting place to start.
Sure thing. Well, Yuri Bezmenov is a legend in his own right. He was a KGB agent who defected to the West in the 80s. And he's famous for an interview he did in 1984 warning the West about this concept of ideological subversion, where you destroy a civilization from within. And the steps he laid out are chillingly accurate. He said first is demoralization. It takes a few decades. And then you have a crisis. And then you have this normalization of communism. And he gave that talk in 1984. He passed away in 1993. So he didn't get a chance to see that all come to fruition, but I'm carrying on his legacy by discussing this topic from things that I've seen in my life. I went to what I call a demoralized Ivy League school, and I saw that rot spread all over the place into the cities, into corporate America, and yeah, it's been a fun journey. Just randomly starting the Substack a few years ago, and meeting really interesting people like you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see some of the historical figures and what's kind of proven to be, I don't know what the word is, but prescient, I guess, as far as predicting what's going to happen 20 or 30 years ahead of time, whether it's figures like Ted Kaczynski or Yuri Bezmenov kind of seeing through, like, it seemed like things were going pretty well at the time, and now you kind of see where things are at. And I don't think many people in America are excited about the way things have been going as of late. So I think if you want to jump into some of the stuff you saw in academia, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is just from an anecdotal observation from conversations with older generations, is that the different age groups have very different views on higher education, different attitudes towards college. And I think there's a reason you see like declining enrollment, especially among like younger men, especially among young white men. So I think it'd be interesting to start with your thoughts on academia and see where that takes us.
Yeah, well, like I haven't been in academia in quite some time, over a decade ago, and I think you're significantly younger than I am, but I'll just give you the overview of my experience. I grew up in an era where the branding and prestige of elite universities was still very strong. Everybody wanted to get into those colleges, and starting from a young age and probably much younger now, that was your goal. And once you hit high school, you're starting to prep for SATs. You want to take as many AP classes as you can. You want to do your extracurricular activities so that you have that on your resume for your application. When I got there, it was quite shocking how left and Marxist it was. I had heard rumors, and like I grew up relatively apolitical, moderate, didn't have any teachers in high school who would push agendas on us, but I actually went to this freshman orientation program, which was invite only for students of color. And unknowingly, I participated in a struggle session because for that program, which lasted a few days, you had this really intense denouncing of all things related to Western civilization, and it was all very heavy on the racism and oppression narrative. And then over time I started realizing that this has happened in history before. I come from a family that escaped communism, more specifically from the CCP in China, which held these struggle sessions during their cultural revolution in the 60s and 70s. So this this very intense brainwashing and agitation happened already on my campus. It's almost 20 years ago, and then I've seen that spread, and it happens a lot more quickly now because of technology. The bad ideas that come from the grievance studies professors and administrators within the campuses can now take over the rest of society very quickly, and we saw that accelerate in the the early 2020s with the whole George Floyd riots and DEI.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to put anything out that'll dox you, but I'm 29 right now, finished up with college, went to UW about feels like forever ago, but graduated in 2020, right into the whole COVID circus. But so I definitely saw a lot of that as far as the picking people based on like what boxes they ticked and not like how smart they are. Like I remember a bunch of people that I thought were idiots getting into the business school, and it's has very little to do with who's the sharpest tool in the shed, I guess is how I'd put it. So yeah, I guess it's interesting to see too. I'm not sure if things are like past the point of no return, or if there's any incentive to change the way things have been going for universities. But I think there's a lot of signs that a lot of people are just saying, you know what, I'm not interested in paying $70 or $75,000 a year if you're going out of state for tuition for what is effectively turned into like an indoctrination exercise. So
Yeah, and I think this has been going on for decades because it's very hard to quantify this, but you can remember in high school, especially if there's a competitive culture in gunning for these universities, like you know who gets the best grades, you know who's the smartest, who's doing well in their SATs, and if over the course of a long period of time you start to see that people who are achieving high merits are not getting into schools, but then people who are inferior to that are, then you see that the system is illegitimate. And an illegitimate system cannot last, especially as tuition keeps going up, far outpacing inflation. And the quality of students who go there and the quality of instruction they receive has declined during that time. Like the economic model of universities is totally messed up. That they're basically hedge funds with a little school attached to them, and they've
yeah,
lived off of these endowments.
And a loan department too. Don't forget the loan department.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a good thing that they're facing a reckoning. Unfortunately, I think the top universities still enjoy the brand name that they've built up over centuries, and they also have billions of dollars in endowments that they can fall back on. But you are seeing this wave of smaller universities closing because they never had that branding or the endowment, and they're still charging the same amount. Like, why would you pay $70,000-$80,000 to go to Evergreen State? Like, that's just a farce, and we're seeing that start to unravel.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see in the next, say, 5-10 years, do you think we see that some of the colleges that have basically coasted on brand name reputations start to like burn some of that intellectual capital, I guess is a way to put it, like with the Ivy Leagues and places like Stanford, where like they've kind of built up this reputation, but then you have stuff going on where people just look at it and say, you know what, I'm not interested in pursuing like the Ivy League education to get my foot into the door of one of these like lucrative, like fast track careers, end up in a big city, stuff like that. Do you think we see the Ivy League start to slide, or some of these like brand name schools start to decline?
Well, I think they've already slid a lot reputationally, but numbers wise, I think they're still going to be able to fill their seats, and they've kept the number of seats available artificially low because they want to be this scarce luxury item. So like application numbers, I think have plateaued or come down, but that still means that they're single digit percentage acceptance rates, which gives them that air of exclusivity. And for now, top employers are still going to recruit there. Some are the smarter ones. I think are getting more creative and looking at other pools of talent. I think there's a huge arbitrage to be had there. Like, to be blunt, basically, if you go and get the top white and white adjacent, as they call it, kids from the second, what used to be called the second tier schools, I think that's where you're going to get the best bang for your buck on talent, because the all students at Ivy Leagues, yeah, like the creme de la creme is still going to be there, but you can't rely on that as much as you used to. So I think that's where they've already declined, but I don't think they'll ever fully collapse. And I think you're going to need new institutions to fill that void. You've got things that have popped up like the Teal Fellowship, which is still very small, right? I think they only took 10 or 20 kids every year, but once again, Teal was a decade ahead of everybody else in saying, like, what's the point of spending 250K on the Ivy League when I will give you $250,000 and you can just hang out with all the other Teal fellows who are very bright and ambitious. And lo and behold, I think he can claim that over 10 companies worth north of $1 billion have been founded by Teal fellows. So you've got things like that. You've got things like UATX. They have their first class of freshmen in there. It's 100 people roughly, but that's still a drop in the bucket, just pure numbers wise, compared to the Ivy Leagues, who combined are taking in 15,000, maybe 20,000 students every year.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought, because I think the way I kind of look at colleges now, I think we kind of hit peak DEI maybe a couple of years ago. It seems like people are waking up to how insane some of these policies were, but the way I kind of look at college now, looking back, like with the benefit of hindsight, is it's basically a system to like filter out different levels of people in like the post civil rights era, because we can't test for like IQ. We can't like just go and do some of these things that would be like basically discrimination, is the way the civil rights era would view it. But I think if you're asking, like, if I was to go out and hire someone for a job, and it could be anything from like basic stuff to like engineering, finance, whatever it is, like, and you give me a choice between someone who has like a high GPA from a college, or like the white guy who's bored out of his mind in high school, but he has like 140 IQ, it's like, that seems like a no brainer to me. But I think that's where, like you're saying, there's an arbitrage to be had if you can go around kind of the typical university system. So, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on DEI, because I don't think a lot of the older generations realize like how, I'm not saying it's like radicalized every young person, but I think it has woken up a lot of people to a lot of different agendas, when you kind of see like it's not based on merit. And a lot of these things that happen, like we were basically sold a bill of goods on a lot of this stuff. And I think a lot of people living in a bubble still think, oh, it's still fine. Like most of the things still function, and they don't really see it because um, they basically don't have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So you've written about some of the DEI stuff before. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on where that might be going, if we've already hit peak DEI, or what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to subvert subversion everywhere, and DI is just one tentacle of this, but you have to mock them. You have to make these people feel like they didn't earn it for sure, and they're a joke, and everyone's laughing behind their backs or even in their face. Because that's what they fear the most, is that people see through their BS and their grift. So I do feel like we've reached an inflection point on that. And yeah, I'm sure what you saw as a late 20s person was exponentially worse than me. I'm roughly a decade older than you, and I I don't think you could possibly have worked in any corporate environment, or government and academia are far worse. But yeah, like you can't work in any professional setting with a paycheck job from an employer without seeing the whole spectrum of it. DEI hiring, DEI promotions, DEI firings, even, right?
And
And
trainings. Don't forget the trainings.
yeah, I mean, the trainings are just like you have all sorts of trainings in every company, and you just click through them because you have to, and compliance annoys you. But
As a
you think
side note,
about that, yeah,
I do wonder how much money is wasted every year on like bullshit DEI trainings and some of these other things that are just like waste of time, and everyone just like clicks through them as fast as they can just to get them done. Like it's got to be
yeah,
some
but you're
absurd
also
amount.
you're also just wasting so many man hours that could be devoted towards making your company perform better and
Yeah.
building the best products. You're just a simple business stuff. But I think some of these institutions, they have the luxury of wasting a lot of that because, in academia, for example, like that's not a classic for-profit business, and they've got lots of subsidies coming in that make all these unnatural things happen. And then I think for the private sector, if you look at where it's most pernicious, it's in these big tech companies that are essentially monopolies. So in those companies, you can afford to have a majority of your employees basically like not add much value. And we found that out pretty quickly with Elon buying Twitter and firing 70+% of the staff there. And did the core product lose any function at all? No. In fact, it got better. So I think with DEI going away, we're only in like the second or third inning. We've still got a long way to go, and those people are going to fight tooth and nail because there's a funny quote from Chairman Mao himself in this great book I read, where he just said, like half jokingly, if the revolution ends, like we're all not going to have any jobs. So there's always going to be a revolution. We have to keep this going. And that's essentially where all the DEI commissars stand right now, because there's no way that they can get any job that pays nearly as much as it does right now. And once people start eliminating these positions, getting rid of it everywhere, they're going to be in the unemployment line. Like they have nothing to offer to any serious company.
Yeah, I think you look at it, I think a lot of those like professor roles, admin roles, some of the roles in different companies and agencies, like it's basically just UBI for a parasite class. So I
Yep.
think it'll be good when we start to cut some of that stuff out. But one of the things you're saying there that reminded me of like the people that kind of like are just wishing we could return to the 90s and say stuff like I didn't leave the left left me, stuff like that. Um, like I think that's basically cope when like you realize that a lot of this stuff there's no pausing where it's going and what a lot of these people want, and it's not something you can just like freeze in time because oh that's as far as we need to take the cultural revolution and now we're all good, like men and women are equal, all the different races are equal, like all the egalitarian fantasies that people want to believe. But um I just think it's something that you see um from people that are just still trying to figure out like how do we end up here with like the gender madness and like some of these different agendas that most people look at and they think it's insane. Most people won't like speak out about it, but like even I would say, I would guess like 90% of the country looks at like the gender changes for kids and they just like, there's like that disgust reaction in them, but most of them won't say anything about it. But um, anyway, I could rant on some of that stuff forever, but I think, I think there is a long way to go in the DEI stuff, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Um, but one of the things that I think I've kind of touched on a little bit with our first couple topics that I think is something that I've been kicking around for a while is a pretty interesting thing that I've seen more and more, especially on social media, is some of the generational differences. and attitudes towards certain topics, towards certain groups, towards certain world events, even. And I think that'd be interesting to get your opinion on what you kind of see from like the differences between like the boomers who kind of benefit from the system and the younger generations who feel left out, and the kind of Gen X, older millennials that are kind of caught in the middle. But I think the generational divide is one of the biggest things that the country's gonna have to figure out here in the next 5 or 10 years. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, do you consider yourself a Zoomer?
So I'm kind of like, I've looked at this up before. I'm kind of like either youngest millennial or oldest Zoomer, depending on the cutoff. But the way I'd put it
Okay.
is I'm too young to know anything about MySpace and too old to ever have TikTok. So for people that know their social media, they'll understand what that means. But
Yeah.
basically, I got like the back end of like decent video games from like 90s, 2000s, all that stuff, and kind of grew up into this weird um, environment where things were changing fast and you don't really notice it and figure out something's wrong until you're looking back on it and say like, wow, that was not normal and is not how I would choose to raise my kids when I start having kids. But
Right.
it's like, I don't know exactly what to call it, but you can basically just put it on like the border of Gen Z and millennial, I guess, is where I'd fall.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just do a quick survey of the generations and broadly what they think. Obviously, it's hard, just like with anything else, to consider a group a monolith because there's going to be plenty of people who are dissenters or dissidents within those ranks. I mean, look, the boomers, we're reaching this changing of the guard, especially with the election and the new government and employee appointees forming. But yeah, I mean, I think the boomers have enjoyed this long ride at the top. They've always seen America improve, and they are completely locked into institutional trust. And it's because of them that we have a lot of the problems we see today. And you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think a lot of people can't comprehend how much their country has changed while they've been cocooned in their nice suburbs. This is what I call the AWFLs, the affluent white female liberals. And there's like, a bizarro parallel universe on Substack of what I call Trump derangement Substack. And everyone who writes those things, we're talking like Heather Cox Richardson, the biggest Substack of all, almost 2 million readers, Robert Reich, Dan
That
Rather.
must be nice.
Yeah, look, I keep an eye on these things, but like this is, if you want to know what the boomer hive mind thinks, look at those Substacks, and it's just drivel. It's horrible writing. They can't seem to write about anything other than Trump. It's as if it's the only thing going on in the world. There's not like a million other issues that are worth exploring, and I think those people are just pretty much broken brained. And again, this is not all boomers, but whether you're, no matter what side of political spectrum you're on as a boomer, like Trump's obviously a boomer at 78 years old, you still have that blind spot of like, hey, everything from the moment I was born has been on the rise, and we have to trust the experts and keep the institutions strong. So that's them. I think Gen X, right? They're the most conservative cohort. They grew up very libertarian in just their personal lives because they were latchkey kids. They just ran around. No one was micromanaging them or helicopter parenting them. So they've got that rebellious streak, which I think lends itself well to the future. And then the millennials have had a tough go of it. You look at all the terrible things that have happened as millennials has come of age. You had 9/11, the Forever Wars, the 2008 crash, subsequent financial crisis and recession, and then of course wokeism. That was all millennials coming of age. And now what I think is interesting with Trump's appointment so far, if you look at JD Vance, Vivek, Tulsi, Pete Hegseth, they all fall into this elder millennial cohort, which is the last cohort of humans that grew up without smartphones and high-speed internet. Yeah, I didn't have an iPhone until a few years after college. I'm glad I went to college without smartphones. I'm glad I went to college without ubiquitous Wi-Fi, and people just zoning out into the digital world, you had a really vibrant, fun time because you were going to have to be in person. And I think that that cohort is very different from younger millennials. The younger millennials already fell into a lot of the subversion and demoralization of social media. They were kind of the guinea pigs figuring out how that could work, and a lot of it didn't turn out so well with like online bullying and people getting addicted to both digital opium in the form of TikTok, but also physical opium. Lots of drugs, whether it's fentanyl, cocaine, even weed. Now, I think there's finally a reckoning about how damaging people smoking lots of marijuana is to their long-term mental health and physical health. So I
Well,
think
on
that's,
that in particular
yeah,
too, like the weed that's out there now, like you look at the some of the THC percentages, and I don't like smoke anymore, but used to more than I should have. But you look at like the percentage, like THC percentage, and what's in it now, like it's not what it was 50 years ago. It's probably anywhere from 5 to 10 times more potent than it used to be. So
oh yeah, I can believe that. It's all debilitating, and when people get hooked on this stuff, they of course need bigger and bigger doses to to enjoy it. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of us millennials were hoping that the Zoomers would not go in our direction and wake up, and it appears, especially with this election, that they have. So I think that's the white pill. That's something that all of us older folks are very excited about. Is that the Zoomers grew up in this environment that was so bleak, and they don't trust any institutions, and now they're finally coming into their own, where they're like, all right, if something sucks, we're going to fix it, or we're going to build something different for our own. And screw the prestige of colleges, screw the prestige of let's go work at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and whatever. Like most of those companies are full of BS. You cover finance. Like Wall Street fell for the whole ESG scam, and that's a similar thing to DEI, where there's so many commissars embedded into the system. It's going to be hard to root out. But I think the ultimate freedom and sovereignty is to go out as Zoomers and just make things happen for yourself. Don't be passive. Don't fall into the traps of demoralization. And I feel like as long as Zoomers stay on that path, whatever generation comes behind them should respect that more than the millennials. Like you don't. I think for a lot of people looking up to millennials in age, you don't want to be those people. I know these people. They have very sad, pathetic lives. And I think younger people have good instincts on that. It's like, hey, do I want to be some HR lady who just polices everything and goes home and drinks wine with her cats and is going to end up alone? No, I don't want that. That does not seem like a great future. So as long as I guess the base elder millennials and the Zoomers lock arms, we've got many decades of great things ahead.
yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting, and you kind of see this with some of the attitudes on media, is like I don't have a real high opinion of most people. Just that's the way the world works, I think. And but if you lie to people constantly about everything, eventually they'll all figure it out, and they'll clue in on the joke, whether it's like, oh, safe and effective, and you repeat it thousands of times, and like, oh, turns out that was a lie. Or like some of the stuff around um the George Floyd, or like as I like to call him, George Fentanyl riots in 2020. um like you go back and look at all this stuff, and it's just like if these people are saying something, like you can almost just assume they're lying about it. It's kind of like it flips the trust but verify on its head, to where it's like distrust but verify. And I think that's a decent segue into some of the stuff on mainstream media, because like you write a Substack, I write a Substack, we both kind of have the podcast and have been doing that. But I think election and some of the stuff going on basically showed how like the media is dead and they haven't really figured it out yet. But like if you look at the average age of the viewers of like CNN or MSNBC or even Fox, like it's what 68, 70 years old, somewhere in there for the different networks. And it's it like most of the content they put out there is just like to stir up emotion and it's not actually news. So I think it's a interesting thing to see Substack continuing to do well, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on where you think the media landscape is going, if it's going to be continuing to improve over the next 5-10 years.
Well, I think independent media is definitely going to improve. I think Substack itself has a huge market to take. I did a calculation on this, and their addressable market is massive, and they've only penetrated like 1% of just the total amount of people. And I think the big bet, obviously, is if readers will be willing to open their wallets for independent journalists and creators, writers. And so far, it seems like they do. And as long as you can continue to shift not just the eyeballs, but the wallet share into Substack, I think we've got a rising tide that's going to lift a lot of boats here. And look, I don't have any professional background in media. Like I truly just started this on a whim a couple of years ago, and I've seen it grow far beyond any expectations. So like once you start to reach that zone of, oh wow, like this can actually economically sustain not just me but my family, like that's when you reach this revelation of like, wow, this is definitely the way that the media is going to go. And I'm hopeful that all the really high quality output will be rewarded. That's the way it should be. It's like this marketplace of ideas. You can engage with whatever you want to, and you just generate a good positive feedback loop with your community. It's like, hey, if you're informing people and entertaining them in a way that they appreciate, that for sure the mainstream media is not doing, then you will be rewarded. And there's not going to be any censorship. Substack's done a great job of that. There's not going to be any like algorithmic hacking to keep people addicted. And you also own your readership. You at any point you can download everyone's email addresses. So it's become a much more intimate thing. And then once you start to meet some people in person, or you do things like this, where you talk to other writers on podcasts, this is an ecosystem that is kind of the wild, wild west in the best way. I think people have just good honor codes and the right mentality of collaboration here.
Yeah, I think too, like you don't have to do the whole advertising model. Like if you ever see an Ozempic ad on my podcast, you'll know I've sold out. But the thing that I think is interesting is like you said, it's basically in like the early innings, even though it feels like, okay, like there's been an explosion in the number of people that have podcasts and an explosion in like number of people that have Substacks. But like if you think that's the direction media is going and you really only need like, okay, like a computer, a microphone, a camera, if you have a podcast, like you don't need all that overhead of what it takes to get like a media company, a cable TV company up and off the ground. So I think there's a long runway ahead of it. So I think it's gonna be interesting to watch, but I'm very excited to see where it goes, and I'm definitely looking forward to like the media, mainstream media dying basically as older generations start to pass on. So
Yeah. I mean, there's a great concept that stuck with me is with content, it's infinitely scalable. As long as you have a laptop and an internet connection, you can reach the entire world. And that's never happened before in human history. So that's incredible. And then the numbers, the math is not that intimidating. There's this concept of 1,000 true fans. If you can get 1,000 people to pay you $100 a year because they like what you're doing, then that's a pretty solid living in most parts of the country. And you see Substack every day it seems like there's more of these people reaching that mark with the orange check, and now there's a pretty significant amount of people who have the purple check, which means 10,000 paid subscribers every year, and that's like gets into the 7-figure salaries. So there's never been a better time for talent to shine. And look, there's still going to be a bit of a power law, like with most things, where like a small percentage at the top are going to rake in the vast majority of revenues coming from Substack. But I think as long as people keep an open mind and don't get fossilized the way that mainstream media does, like, okay, I'm only going to lock into ABC and CNN, New York Times, just like, I'm only going to lock into Heather Cox Richardson, Richard Reich. Like, we got to get away from that. And if you cut the cord, you're going to save yourself a couple $100 a month right there. You might as well just repurpose that part of your budget to supporting people you like on Substack.
Yeah, I think it's a good change, but there's lots of things changing right now. I don't know if you're familiar with the fourth turning, but I think we are going through a kind of shift in history that I think we'll look back on and realize that a lot changed from basically start of 2020 to like the end of this decade or 2035 or whatever you want to kind of put on the time horizon. But one of the things that I think is interesting that it always seems to make it onto my For You tab on Twitter is some of the basically one of the main divides. Like I talked about the generational stuff a little bit, but I think one of the other main divides we're gonna have to figure out as a culture is the divide between men and women. And that always seems to pop up on my Twitter For You tab. And it's just like the amount of people that will be commenting or like weighing in with basically garbage takes on different things going on, I think is it's pretty interesting to watch. But you've written about that a little bit where on different topics and stuff about the birth rate and this and that. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what the male female divide looks like moving forward.
Yeah, well, you can make it really simple on how to solve it, which is just get married and have kids. Like once it's the best thing I've ever done, and I feel like once you have that going for you, then there is no gender divide. Like you're making a shared sacrifice with a woman to create life and nurture it and raise the next generation. There's nothing better than that. Now, I think the uphill battle is, of course, that many young women have been demoralized since the time they hit puberty. All this messaging that the most important thing that you should care about as a voter is your right to an abortion. And you got to go and get a degree so that you can be a strong, independent woman, move to the big city, go and make a nice salary for yourself, go to Soul Cycle, spin class, go have mimosas at brunch. Like this is a very difficult thing to combat. And the numbers game is pretty bad now, right? Because they vote much further left than men, but you also just have that basic human instinct since we were cavemen that the women want to marry up. And higher education has become so skewed now where there's 3 women for every 2 men who graduate with a bachelor's degree. So just based off that, 1 in 3 women is not going to be able to marry up the way they want. They're going to have to find somebody who didn't go to college, maybe doesn't make as much money as they do. So once again, this is just the consequences of affirmative action and toxic feminism that you've empowered these people, you've given them every leg up along the way, but once they get to their mid-late 20s, they look around and they don't have good marriage material men in their minds, and they don't know where to look. They all just get the media messaging that you've got to get a, what do they call the 666, like 6 feet tall, 6 figures, 6-pack, which I found some.
I think it's a little more crude than that. I think it's also 6 inches
Oh,
in the
pants. God. Well, I stumbled upon this fascinating website. It's called femaledelusioncalculator.com. And if you put in,
and the bags of cat food.
Yeah, I mean, we can do this live right now. Like, you can say, all right, I'm looking for someone
I'll pull it up. This should be.
who's 30, let's say 35, maximum age, minimum income 100,000, minimum height 6 feet tall. What percentage of the male population? Let's say any race. Let's say you're into diversity. Oh yeah, and you can toggle on not married. You can toggle on not obese. So let's find what percentage of men fit that standard between 18, 20, 35. 0.9%.
Here it is. I got it pulled
Yeah.
up on the screen here.
Yeah. So
18 to 35, not married.
So whoever made this, like, hats off to them. But this is the core of your question: is like, if unless you can break women out of this delusion that they deserve to have a man like that, there's going to be some really terrible things happening to the birth rate, to the marriage rates, and to the overall cohesion and harmony between man and woman.
Yeah. I should actually exclude married. Let's see what it says. I didn't realize it picked that. Yeah, so that's interesting stats for sure, but it does kind of show that the expectations that people have are like skewed by what people will see on social media. And if all you see is like the people that are like the right end of the bell curve, then if like most people just by the average like rule of averages are not going to have those outcomes. And if it's always like, oh, you got to hold out for what you deserve, and like some of the stuff you see on like Twitter and some of the stuff that like leaks through goes viral, it's like okay, like good luck with that. But I think it's pretty interesting to see how some of the brain rot on social media has basically kind of corrupted, especially among younger generations, like the whole male female dynamic, which I don't think was as big of an issue even 10 or 15 years ago. So
Yeah, it's such a distortion. So I think that's where most of the future hinges on, is if you can just form good families and raise the next generation well, then you've really got this country reaching the next level. So I think, like, of the people I know who have managed to become parents, and unfortunately there's a lot who haven't, because millennials grew up in this toxic soup, and for some women now that I know, it's pretty much too late. Like, if you're still single at 30 plus, and you're in a competitive city, that's already pretty tough to overcome. So, like, I think with younger Zoomer women, hopefully they just come to that realization early enough, relative to their millennial peers. But yeah, I think, I don't know if there's like it's with so many things that I write about. It's not, I'm not a policy wonk. I don't find that stuff interesting. I get bored by it. And I think so many of these things in the culture can't really be solved by policy. You have to have a mindset shift. So, whether that's through humor, whether, we all have different approaches on going after it. But yeah, like, I think Elon's right about this, and he's good about repeating that, if America and other developed countries continue to see this birth rate collapse, our future as a species and on this planet is not going to be too bright. So, yeah, once again, putting that responsibility on the Zoomer men to lead. I think, unfortunately, you still have a responsibility as a man to lead, as much as the narrative says that, the woman's in charge now and the future is female. You have to follow them. No, like, deep down, they want someone to take charge and be a leader. And if that leads to, tough dating conversations early on, of like, hey, you might not vote the same way as me, but like, we can at least hear each other out, and maybe there will be a shift. I think that happens more than you think sometimes, where a liberal woman will meet a man who doesn't bend over like liberal men do, and actually stands his ground, and eventually convinces her on a few things, and they get married and have kids. And trust me, once a woman has kids, that's like the biggest factor in them shifting to the right, because it opens their eyes to so many things, in particular how poisoned our food is. So I think like RFK, the whole Make America Healthy movement, swung the election. He had a couple of percentage points overall, and he brought them over to Trump. And a lot of those percentage points come from moms who realize how much effort they have to put in just to give their kids decent meals that aren't heavily processed and poisoned.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good topic to go into. But before I forget, I think one of the things I've kind of said in conversations just off the podcast is I think in the next 5 or 10 years, you're gonna see like a shift back towards kind of a culture shift where I think we're gonna see like stay-at-home mom or something close to that, or like homeschooling your kids. That's gonna be, I think, high status in the next 5 or 10 years. And I think the thing about social media is that it can spread way quicker than this stuff would in the past. So I think that can happen a lot quicker than people would expect. So I think that's
Yeah,
gonna
I
be
think you're right on that. The trad wife thing is going to become cool, and unfortunately, we're still a social herd animal. So, like once that becomes cool, and there's plenty of big accounts that are like this, but I think one thing that has missing that hopefully will build up is these women who are leading younger women into this world. Like, hey, you don't want to be that miserable boss you have in a corporation who never married and is just a workaholic and an alcoholic. You want to stay at home with your 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, homeschool them, take good care of their nutrition and watch them flourish. Um, and yeah, I think it's interesting because the people I know who have the biggest families, not just celebrities like Elon, but just in general, like yeah, it's typically that arrangement where the the man works and makes a pretty comfortable income, where the woman can stay home. Unfortunately, going back decades, when you have this this equity and gender equality in the workplace, then you just have much lowered earning potentials. Yeah, I think it suppresses the wages. And so 30, 40 years ago, that used to be the norm. This stay-at-home mom, you raise a sizable family, 3, 4, 5 kids, and the dad works. Now like the dad has to just be a top 1% income performer for that to be possible, especially when you think about the cost of living where those types of jobs are available. So it just like numbers wise, again, because of the way the culture and policies have shifted over the course of a generation or two, that's become a lot harder, but it's still aspirational. And I think deep down, if you ask any husband and wife how they want their household to look, it's going to be like that, where the man will go out, work hard, but he can come home to a wife who's run the home really well and raised the kids.
Yeah. I think one of the things you're saying there too about like the food and the health issue, I think that's it's interesting. It's something that I've been paying a lot more attention to over the last couple of years. But I do think we're like that's another place where we're kind of at like a like cyclical shift where a lot of people are waking up to like a lot of the stuff in the food supply is not food. It's just poison. Like a lot of the seed oils, you can basically just call it like engine lubricant. And that's the best way to think about a lot of those things. But um I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what changes we might see as far as the food supply if RFK does get in, can make a lot of those changes, if he can go after vaccine manufacturers, if we kind of see some of those shifts start to take place, because I think that's like for the good of the country, that I think needs to change. And it's not going to be that we fix obesity because everyone's on Ozempic. It's going to be because like there's a change in attitude towards how seriously we take our health and what people are doing to basically get back in shape, and how that kind of spreads through the culture. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on if we can fix the food supply, if it's something RFK can do, or if there are any other solutions.
Yeah, I think we can. I, I'm hopeful that RFK will be able to drive some of the big policy changes, but most of it still has to be done at the individual level. I think it's empowering when you see people who were out of shape make the effort, and it's really not that much effort. Just like go out, like the basic blocks are so simple. Just make sure you get outside and get fresh air and sunlight. Ideally, you can knock out 10,000 steps in a day, and go do some cardio or lift weights a few times a week. It's really not that hard, but of course, like people have commitments, they have to sit at a desk for their work. So I do think that the big food companies and big pharma companies have to be held accountable, and it might just lead to higher costs. It's unfortunate, but I think people before all this inflation used to be able to eat higher quality food at a lower price, and like that's still like a class issue where like the same families that can afford to keep the mom at home and have more kids are the ones who can go and get organic food. But if people just need to vote with their wallets here again, if you don't want to have Fruit Loops and like garbage, like hormonally saturated meats and seed oils and everything, you have to go out, like go find a farmer, go find a butcher, go find brands that take really good care of the entire supply chain and the process. So if people started moving in that direction, the corporations will follow. And I hope that the American people working in concert with RFK can make that happen for themselves.
Yeah, interesting. I think I'm optimistic about it, but on a lot of this stuff, like there's been lots of quick takes and I think overreactions on who's Trump who Trump is appointing, what's going on with different things as far as cabinet picks, but I basically am taking the approach of like, let's see what happens in the first 100 days before we come to any kind of premature conclusions. So I'm hoping RFK can make some positive changes, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I guess one last topic that I think would be interesting to touch on because it's been a hot button issue this year for not just the U.S. but also Europe is immigration, and that's been one where even people on the so-called left are looking at as like, yeah, there's too many people coming in, and it's like we got to do something about the border. And like it's always funny because people that talk about this and they say, "Oh, America's a nation of immigrants," and like they just conveniently forget to mention those nation of immigrants from like European with European heritage. But I think you look at a lot of the stuff going on now. I think like I'm optimistic about what can happen with the whole immigration issue, and that's something we have to wait and see on. But do you have any thoughts on if the U.S. can kind of turn this thing around and figure out what can be done to kind of fix this issue?
Yeah, I've got to go, so I'll make this quick. I think overall, right, like you want to have this dream team mentality where like we can draft the best picks. Like we want more Elons here for sure, the most successful African American immigrant in history.
Yep.
But yeah, it has to be selective. You can't just have anybody walk across the border and also be incentivized to do so with all the welfare we've been given out and free hotel rooms, free food, free healthcare. That's all got to stop, and then we have to be really selective about it. And yeah, I mean, I do think more broadly, people just don't know how bad it's gotten. Like, and that's the power of the mainstream media. It's not about the lies they tell; it's also about what they don't cover. And I think immigration is one of those things where if you're a classic affluent white female liberal and you live in a nice suburb, you don't think that there's too many people coming to your country. But the second you walk into a big city, or even some of these smaller cities now, like Springfield, Ohio, or Charleroi, Pennsylvania, the ones that got a lot of attention during the campaign, they've been flooded. They can't cope with just the sheer number. So look, I think this has also turned with the new administration, and like all the polling shows that people are in favor of mass deportation. So I think right now with the transition, the picks are good, the personnel is going to be good, the energy is all there, the people are behind it. It's more a matter of execution. And what I'm more want to be more conscious of is the long game. Why did the left was able to do so much over the past 50, 60 years? Because they won the culture, and they have, their billionaires are willing to fund all of their demoralization with the NGOs, art, education. They took it all over. So I think the thing I'll leave it on is I, I I think the next phase of this should involve more prominent right wing people putting their wallets behind culture and media, because like you want to start winning hearts and minds with people who are younger. You need to be there, and the left will continue to pound as much as they can through teachers, through all of that, to indoctrinate the next generation. But if you can make conservatism and big families and secure borders, all these basic common sense things, if you can make that cool and aspirational through culture, through things like Substack, through like, you know, documentaries, meme news networks, the thing that I just I launched, all these things, if they just had a little more gas in the tank, they could really take off and secure things, not just for one election cycle, but for decades or even generations. So let's all work together towards that.
Yeah, I think what you said there too is that, like, it's not so much that they're here for the American dream. They're in a lot of ways here for the American handout. But I know you got to take off here. But so before you do, I want to ask my traditional closing question, which is, what book should add to my reading list? Can be history, finance, anything related to the culture, but whatever you think I'd find interesting.
Wow, there's been a lot of good books this year, like Chris Rufo's book about the counter revolution, Rob Henderson's book Troubled. I'll throw it to an old school book that pretty much no one's read, but I broke it down in one of my Substack posts. It's called The Man Who Stayed Behind, and it was a memoir written by an American named Sidney Rittenberg, who remained in China following the end of World War II and ended up becoming the most senior CCP foreign member. And he actually was in Mao's inner circle. He translated for Mao, did propaganda projects. So he had a first row seat to just how communist revolutions play out and all the devastation. He personally was purged at one point, like everyone is, because the left eats its own. And he ended up in solitary confinement in a prison for about a decade. So yeah, it's you can still find it on Amazon and get an old hard copy. It was like written a couple decades ago, and he's no longer with us. But that was a totally crazy book, because you don't really see a lot about how that period of history played out, and he had a really really close view and perspective on that whole era.
Interesting. I'll have to
Yeah.
look into that. So if my readers and listeners want to find more of your work, where can they find you on social media or on Substack?
Yeah, Substack is my primary platform, yuribezmenov.substack.com. And then I'm also on Twitter, Yuri Bezmenov 22.
Awesome. I'll throw those links in there. But I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.